The transport ship's engines died with a mechanical wheeze that echoed through the cramped cargo hold. Commander Sarah Chen pressed her face against the small porthole, watching as the rust-colored surface of Kepler 442c grew larger beneath them. The planet looked exactly as the reports described, barren, lifeless, and utterly hostile to human existence. "Welcome to your new home, traitor," sneered Captain Morrison from behind her. The restraints around Sarah's wrists bit into her skin as she turned to face him. His scarred face held the same expression of disgust he'd worn during her court-martial 6 months ago. Sarah said nothing. There was nothing left to say. The Terran Federation had made their decision. She was guilty of treason for refusing to fire on civilian transports during the Proxima uprising. The fact that those transports carried women and children meant nothing to the military tribunal. Orders were orders, and she had disobeyed them. The landing was rough, the ship's aged thrusters struggling against Kepler 442c's gravity. Sarah felt her stomach lurch as they touched down with a bone-jarring impact. Through the porthole, she could see nothing but endless stretches of red sand and jagged rock formations, stretching to the horizon. Atmospheric readings show breathable air. "Barely," Morrison announced, checking his datapad. "Oxygen levels at 18%, which is just enough to keep you from suffocating immediately. Temperature ranges from -40 at night to 60 Celsius during the day. No water sources detected within scanning range." The cargo bay doors hissed open and Sarah felt the alien air rush in. It was thin and tasted of metal and dust. Morrison grabbed her by the shoulder and pushed her toward the exit. "Your supplies," he said, kicking a small crate toward her feet. "1 week's worth of rations, basic survival gear, and a beacon. When you're ready to die with some dignity, activate it. We'll come collect your body." Sarah looked down at the pathetic collection of items. A single water recycler, protein bars that would last maybe 5 days if she rationed carefully, a thin thermal blanket, and a handheld scanner. It was meant to be a slow death sentence, not a survival kit. "The Federation thanks you for your service, Commander," Morrison said with mock formality. "Try not to die too quickly. We want the other would-be heroes to hear about this." The ship's engines roared back to life, and Sarah had to shield her face from the blast of superheated air. She watched as the transport lifted off, growing smaller and smaller until it was just a bright dot against the orange sky. Then nothing at all. Silence settled over the wasteland like a heavy blanket. Sarah had never experienced quiet like this before. On the ships, there was always the hum of engines, the whisper of air recyclers, the distant chatter of crew members. Here there was nothing but the soft whistle of wind across stone. She picked up the scanner and activated it, sweeping it across the landscape. The readings were grim, but not entirely hopeless. The atmosphere was thin but stable. Gravity was roughly 80% of Earth normal, and there, about 15 kilometers to the north, the scanner detected what might be mineral deposits. Sarah gathered her meager supplies and started walking. The red sand crunched under her boots with each step, and she could already feel the heat building as the alien sun climbed higher in the sky. Her military training kicked in automatically. Conserve energy, maintain steady pace, monitor hydration levels. After 2 hours of walking, she crested a low ridge and saw something that made her stop in her tracks. Scattered across the valley below were the twisted remains of what looked like structures. Not human structures, but definitely artificial. Geometric shapes that nature wouldn't create, made from some kind of dark metal that gleamed dully in the harsh sunlight. The scanner went wild as she approached the ruins. Energy readings spiked and dropped in seemingly random patterns. Sarah moved carefully between the broken structures, trying to piece together what she was seeing. The buildings, if that's what they were, seemed to follow no architectural logic she recognized. Curves flowed into sharp angles, surfaces that should have been horizontal twisted upward at impossible angles. At the center of the ruins stood a tower that had somehow remained mostly intact. It rose about 30 meters into the air, its surface covered in patterns that might have been writing or decoration. As Sarah drew closer, she noticed that the patterns seemed to shift and change when she wasn't looking directly at them. She reached out to touch the tower's surface and jerked her hand back as electricity arced between her fingers in the metal. The scanner's reading spiked again, and for a moment Sarah could have sworn she heard something like music in the wind. The sun was beginning to set, and the temperature was dropping rapidly. Sarah found a sheltered spot between two of the smaller ruins and set up her meager camp. The thermal blanket was pitifully inadequate against the growing cold. but it was better than nothing. As darkness fell, she saw lights begin to flicker within the ruins. Not electric lights, but something else entirely. They pulsed and danced like living things, casting strange shadows that moved independently of their sources. Sarah gripped her scanner tightly, watching the energy readings climb higher and higher. She should have been terrified. Any rational person would have been terrified. Instead, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Curiosity. Whatever this place was, whoever had built it, they had left something behind, something that was still active after who knew how many years. The protein bar she ate for dinner tasted like cardboard, but it was fuel. The recycled water was warm and metallic, but it was life. Sarah did the math in her head. At current consumption rates, she had maybe 4 days before thirst became a serious problem. The cold was already sapping her strength faster than she'd anticipated. But the ruins changed everything. There was technology here, even if she didn't understand it. And technology meant the possibility of survival. Sarah pulled the thermal blanket tighter around her shoulders and stared up at the alien, constellations wheeling overhead. The Federation had sent her here to die as an example to others who might consider defying orders. They expected her to activate the beacon within a week, begging for rescue or a quick death. Instead, Sarah felt something hard and determined settling in her chest. She was Commander Sarah Chen, veteran of 12 deep space missions and graduate of the Federation's most elite survival courses. She had survived solar storms, asteroid impacts, and 3 different alien parasites. She would not die quietly on this dead world. The lights in the ruins pulsed brighter as if responding to her thoughts. Sarah smiled grimly and settled in to wait for dawn. Dawn came with a rush of golden light that transformed the red wasteland into something almost beautiful. Sarah had slept poorly, waking every few minutes as the temperature fluctuated wildly. The ruins around her looked different in daylight, less mysterious but somehow more purposeful. The patterns on the central tower were definitely symbols of some kind, arranged in spiraling columns that wrapped around the structure like a vast scroll. Her water supply was already running dangerously low. The recycler could only do so much with the thin atmosphere, and her body was losing moisture faster than anticipated. Sarah rationed herself to small sips, knowing that each one brought her closer to the edge. The scanner had been recording energy patterns all night, and when Sarah reviewed the data, she found something interesting. The fluctuations weren't random at all. They followed a complex but repeating pattern, like a heartbeat or breathing rhythm. Whatever was powering these ruins was still alive in some sense. She spent the morning exploring the site more thoroughly, mapping the layout and taking detailed scans of the various structures. The ruins covered nearly a square kilometer, with the central tower at the heart of a rough spiral pattern. Smaller buildings radiated outward like the arms of a galaxy, each one unique but somehow connected to the whole. In one of the outer structures, Sarah discovered what might have been living quarters. The space was filled with alcoves sized for beings roughly human height but much thinner. Strange furniture that adjusted its shape when she approached. Most importantly, she found evidence of water storage. Crystal formations that her scanner indicated had once contained significant amounts of H2O. The crystals were dry now, but their structure suggested they could be recharged somehow. Sarah collected several samples, hoping she could figure out how to reactivate them. Her engineering training had covered alien technology basics, though nothing quite like this. As the day wore on and the temperature climbed toward its peak, Sarah retreated to the shade of the central tower. The metal surface was cool to the touch despite the blazing sun, somehow regulating its own temperature. She pressed her ear against it and heard a faint humming, like machinery running deep underground. That's when she noticed the depression in the sand at the tower's base. It was roughly circular, about 2 meters across, and filled with the same dark sand that covered everything else. But when Sarah brushed the sand away, she revealed a smooth metal surface covered in the same spiral patterns as the tower itself. Her scanner readings went crazy as she cleared more sand. Energy levels spiked higher than anything she'd detected so far. The patterns on the exposed metal began to glow with a soft blue light that pulsed in rhythm with the tower's humming. Sarah knelt beside the revealed surface and tried to make sense of what she was seeing. The pattern seemed to be some kind of interface, but designed for a completely alien mindset. Where human technology favored straight lines and right angles, this flowed like water frozen in motion. Tentatively, she placed her palm against one of the larger spiral patterns. The metal was warm and seemed to vibrate under her touch. The blue glow intensified, and suddenly the humming became audible even without pressing her ear to the tower. Then the ground beneath her feet began to move. The metal surface wasn't just an interface, it was a door. The entire circular section was rotating slowly, sand cascading away as it turned. Sarah scrambled backward as the rotation accelerated, revealing a spiral ramp that descended into darkness below. The humming was louder now, coming from the depths of whatever lay beneath the ruins. Sarah's scanner indicated massive energy sources deep underground, along with what might be atmospheric processors and, incredibly, water. She should have been cautious. Military protocol demanded careful reconnaissance before entering unknown alien structures. But Sarah's water supply would be gone by tomorrow, and the heat was already taking its toll. This might be her only chance. The ramp was smooth and perfectly engineered, descending in a gentle spiral that made walking easy even in the growing darkness. Bioluminescent strips along the walls provided just enough light to see by, activating as she approached and dimming behind her. The air grew cooler and more humid as she descended, a blessed relief from the surface heat. After what felt like several hundred meters, the ramp opened into a vast underground chamber. Sarah stopped at the threshold, her breath catching in her throat. The space was enormous, easily the size of a Federation cruiser hangar. The ceiling arched high overhead, supported by those same flowing curves that characterized all the alien architecture she'd seen. But it was what filled the chamber that made her heart race with sudden hope. Gardens, actual growing things. Plants that created a riot of colors she had no names for. They grew in perfectly ordered beds that followed the spiral pattern, fed by streams of clear water that flowed through channels carved into the floor. The air down here was rich and breathable, with an oxygen content that made her slightly dizzy after breathing the thin surface atmosphere. Sarah took deep, grateful breaths and felt energy returning to her body. At the center of the garden chamber stood another tower, smaller than the surface structure but clearly related. This one was transparent, filled with swirling lights that danced and pulsed like living things. As Sarah approached, the lights began to move faster, clustering near the surface closest to her. Her scanner was practically screaming now, detecting energy signatures unlike anything in Federation databases. But there was something else, something that made her stop and really study the readings. Pattern recognition software was finding matches, similarities to quantum processing arrays and neural network matrices. This wasn't just a building or even a city. It was a computer, a vast, living computer that had been running for who knew how long, maintaining these gardens and keeping the systems operational. Sarah reached out to touch the transparent tower, and the moment her fingers made contact, the world exploded into light and sensation. Images flooded her mind, not her own memories, but something else entirely. She saw this world as it had been thousands of years ago, green and blue and alive with creatures that moved like liquid poetry. She saw the great ships that had carried them away when their sun began to die, leaving only this automated refuge behind. And she saw the instructions, burned into her consciousness like words written in fire. How to operate the gardens, how to access the water systems, how to activate the atmospheric processors that could slowly transform the surface environment. When the vision ended, Sarah was on her knees beside the tower, gasping. The lights inside pulsed more slowly now, almost peacefully. A stream of clear, cold water had begun flowing from a spout that had emerged from the floor beside her. She drank deeply, feeling life return to her body with each swallow. The water was perfect, better than anything the Federation's recyclers could produce. As she drank, she noticed that several of the alien plants had begun extending tendrils in her direction, as if drawn by her presence. Sarah looked around the chamber with new understanding. This wasn't just a survival shelter. It was a gift, left behind by a dying race for whoever might one day need it. The computer had been waiting, maintaining everything in perfect condition, ready to share its knowledge with anyone capable of accepting it. The Federation had sent her here to die, but instead she had found something miraculous, technology that could transform dead worlds into gardens, knowledge that could change everything humanity thought they knew about survival and adaptation. Sarah smiled and reached out to touch one of the curious plants. It wrapped gently around her finger, and she felt a sense of welcome that transcended species barriers. She was no longer an exile on a dead world. She was a gardener and she had work to do. 3 weeks had passed since Sarah discovered the underground sanctuary, and the transformation was remarkable. The alien computer, which she had started calling the archive, had been teaching her constantly. Not through words or traditional interfaces, but through direct knowledge transfer that filled her mind with understanding every time she touched the central tower. She learned that the previous inhabitants called themselves the Verdani, and they had been master terraformers. Their entire civilization was built around the concept of bringing life to dead worlds, spreading gardens across the galaxy like seeds on the wind. When their home sun began its death throes, they had built these automated sanctuaries on hundreds of planets, hoping that someday other species would find them and continue their work. The underground complex was vast beyond anything Sarah had initially imagined. Tunnels stretched for kilometers in every direction, connecting multiple garden chambers, workshop areas, and what could only be described as biological laboratories. The archive maintained it all, keeping the water flowing, the air breathable, and the plants healthy. Sarah had moved her camp underground permanently. The surface was becoming more hostile each day as the planet's weather patterns shifted, but down here she was safe and comfortable. The Verdani had designed their facilities for long-term habitation, with sleeping areas that adjusted to her body temperature, and food synthesizers that could create nutritious meals from the garden's produce. But the most amazing discovery was the atmospheric processors. Massive machines buried deep beneath the surface that were slowly, steadily changing the planet's environment. They had been running for millennia, gradually increasing oxygen levels and stabilizing temperature patterns. The process was incredibly slow by human standards, designed to take centuries rather than decades, but the effects were cumulative and permanent. Sarah had been learning to operate the processors more efficiently, using knowledge downloaded from the archive. The Verdani technology was based on biological principles rather than mechanical ones. Instead of brute force terraforming that could destabilize planetary systems, they used carefully engineered organisms to gradually shift atmospheric composition and soil chemistry. Today, she was preparing for the next phase of her work. The archive had shown her how to activate dormant seeds scattered across the planet's surface, seeds that would begin growing once the atmospheric conditions were right. But first, she needed to establish surface stations that could monitor and guide the process. Sarah emerged from the underground complex carrying a backpack full of Verdani biotechnology. The surface temperature was still brutal, but her new environmental suit, grown rather than manufactured, regulated her body temperature perfectly. The suit was a living symbiont that fed on solar radiation and waste heat, converting it into useful energy while keeping her cool. The scanner in her hand was also Verdani-made, far more sophisticated than the Federation device she'd arrived with. It could detect life signs at the molecular level, analyze atmospheric composition in real time, and even predict weather patterns days in advance. Her first destination was a rocky outcrop 12 kilometers north of the main ruins. According to the archive, this location had the right geological conditions for a surface garden. The seeds here had been dormant for thousands of years, waiting for someone to wake them up. The walk across the wasteland was no longer the ordeal it had been 3 weeks ago. Sarah moved with confidence, her suit protecting her from the heat and her water supply unlimited thanks to the portable purifier the archive had provided. She was no longer just surviving, she was thriving. At the outcrop, Sarah used her scanner to locate the buried seed caches. They were deep, protected by crystalline shells that had kept them viable through countless centuries of harsh conditions. She activated a Verdani tool that looked like a cross between a shovel and a flower, and began the careful process of awakening the seeds. The tool sent precise bioelectric pulses into the ground, following patterns the archive had taught her. Each pulse was calibrated to break down specific molecular bonds in the seed shells, while leaving the genetic material inside intact. It was incredibly sophisticated biotechnology disguised as simple gardening. Within minutes, Sarah's scanner detected the first signs of life. The seeds were responding, beginning the slow process of germination. She set up a monitoring station that would track their progress and provide nutrients as they grew. The station looked like a metal flower itself, its petals oriented to catch maximum sunlight for the solar collectors inside. As she worked, Sarah caught herself humming. It was something she hadn't done since before the court-martial, before her world had collapsed around her. The Federation had tried to break her spirit by sending her here, but instead they had given her purpose beyond anything she'd ever experienced. The next station was located in a valley 30 kilometers to the east. This one would monitor a different type of seed, designed to break down the mineral crusts that covered much of the planet's surface and create soil suitable for more complex plant life. The journey took her across terrain that was gradually becoming less hostile as the atmospheric processors did their work. Halfway to the valley, Sarah's long-range scanner picked up something that made her freeze in place. Energy signatures, artificial ones, and they were moving. Sarah crouched behind a boulder and switched her scanner to maximum sensitivity. The readings were definitely artificial, but not Verdani technology. These were Federation power cores approaching from the south at high speed. Multiple contacts, probably a full exploration team. Her heart sank as she realized what this meant. Morrison had said they would come collect her body when she activated the beacon, but she had never activated it. So either they were checking on her ahead of schedule, or something else had brought them here. Sarah thought about the energy signatures she'd been generating with all the Verdani technology. The atmospheric processors alone were putting out enough power to be detected from orbit. If the Federation had been monitoring the system, they would have noticed the changes. She had to get back to the archive. The underground complex was hidden and shielded, but if Federation forces started scanning intensively, they might find it. And if they found it, they would try to claim it for themselves or destroy it to prevent others from having it. Sarah ran across the wasteland faster than should have been possible in the thin atmosphere, but the symbiotic suit was supplementing her oxygen and boosting her muscle efficiency. She reached the ruins just as the Federation ships appeared on the horizon. 3 sleek cruisers that looked like predatory insects against the orange sky. She dove down the spiral ramp and reached the main garden chamber, breathless but undetected. The archive's lights pulsed questioningly as she approached the central tower. Sarah placed her hands on the smooth surface and opened her mind to the data stream. She needed to know if the Verdani had defensive capabilities, anything that could protect the sanctuary from human aggression. The knowledge that flowed into her mind was both reassuring and terrifying. The Verdani had been peaceful, but they weren't naive. Every sanctuary had protective systems designed to prevent misuse of their technology by species that weren't ready for it. The defenses were non-lethal but incredibly effective, capable of disabling ships and technology without harming the crews. But Sarah hesitated to activate them. These were her own people up there, however misguided their intentions might be. Using alien weapons against human beings felt like crossing a line she might never be able to uncross. Instead, she began activating the sanctuary's concealment protocols. The energy signatures would be masked, the entrance sealed, and the entire complex would disappear from scanners as if it had never existed. She could wait underground until the Federation forces left, then continue her work in secret. But as she worked, Sarah realized that hiding wasn't enough. The Federation would be back. They would eventually find the sanctuary, and when they did, they would either weaponize the Verdani technology or destroy it to prevent their enemies from having it. Either way, the dream of transforming dead worlds into gardens would die. Sarah made a decision that would change everything. She reached out to the archive and began downloading everything. Not just the operating procedures and technical knowledge, but the complete cultural database of the Verdani civilization, their history, their philosophy, their dreams of a galaxy filled with life. If the Federation wanted to play power games with alien technology, they would have to do it without her help. But someday, somewhere, Sarah would find people who understood what the Verdani had been trying to accomplish, people who could carry on their work. The download was vast and complex, requiring biological modifications to her brain structure that would take hours to complete. But when it was finished, Sarah would carry the knowledge of an entire civilization in her mind. She would become the bridge between human and Verdani, a living repository of wisdom that could survive whatever the Federation tried to do. Above ground, the ships were landing. Sarah could hear the whine of their engines through the rock. Soon they would be searching the ruins, looking for any sign of what had caused the energy readings. They would find nothing, but the real treasure was already walking away. The download from the archive was complete, and Sarah felt the weight of an entire civilization's knowledge settling into her enhanced neural pathways. The Verdani had modified her brain structure at the cellular level, creating new connections that could store and process information in ways human minds were never designed for. She was no longer quite human, but she was something more. Above ground, Federation boots tramped through the ruins where she had first made contact with Verdani technology. Captain Morrison's voice echoed down through the concealed entrance, though the words were muffled by tons of rock in the sanctuary's shielding. Readings show massive energy expenditure over the past 3 weeks, Morrison was saying to someone. Whatever Chen found down here, it's been active. Spread out and scan everything. I want to know what happened to our trader. Sarah smiled grimly as she felt the archive's concealment protocols activate fully. To the Federation scanners above, the entrance would register as solid stone. The energy signatures would show nothing but background radiation. The ruins would appear exactly as they had when she first arrived, lifeless and dead. But the knowledge in her head painted a very different picture. She could see the sanctuary as the Verdani had intended it. Not just a single complex, but part of a vast network spanning dozens of star systems. Each one was connected through quantum entanglement communicators that operated outside normal spacetime, allowing instantaneous contact across galactic distances. More importantly, she now understood the true scope of the terraforming project. This wasn't just about transforming individual planets. The Verdani had been working to create a galaxy-wide ecosystem, a living network of worlds that could support countless species in harmony. They had called it the Great Garden, and they had nearly completed it when their son died. The atmospheric processors on this world were designed to work in conjunction with similar systems on hundreds of other planets. When enough worlds reached the right atmospheric composition, they would begin exchanging biological material through carefully engineered meteor showers, spreading life from world to world like pollen on the cosmic wind. Sarah felt a deep sadness as she realized how close the Verdani had come to achieving their dream. Another few centuries and the network would have been complete. Instead, they had been forced to flee their dying system, leaving their automated systems to continue the work alone. But they had also left instructions for situations exactly like this one. The archive had protocols for dealing with hostile species that might threaten the Great Garden. Not weapons in the traditional sense, but biological tools that could disable technology, disrupt communications, and force aggressive forces to withdraw. The Federation teams above were becoming frustrated. Sarah could track their movements through the sanctuary's sensor network, watching as they spread out across the ruins, finding nothing but empty buildings and dead technology. Their scanners showed only what the concealment protocols wanted them to see. This doesn't make sense, Morrison was saying. The energy readings were off the charts. There should be evidence of major activity here. Maybe the equipment malfunctioned, suggested another voice, probably one of the science officers. These readings could have been echoes from some kind of magnetic anomaly. Sarah decided it was time to give them something to find. She activated one of the minor ruins on the far side of the complex, causing it to emit a brief energy pulse that would register on their scanners. It would give them something to investigate while leading them away from the sanctuary's true entrance. The deception worked perfectly. She watched through the sensor feeds as the entire Federation team converged on the distant ruin, their excitement evident in their hurried movements. They would spend hours scanning and analyzing it, finding just enough mysterious readings to keep them occupied. While they were distracted, Sarah made her way to a different exit from the sanctuary. The Verdani had built multiple access points, each one carefully concealed and shielded. This one emerged inside a natural cave system, 15 kilometers from the main ruins. Far from the Federation search pattern, she carried a small pack of Verdani biotechnology, tools and seeds that would let her continue the terraforming work even if she had to leave this world. The symbiotic suit had adapted to her biology so completely that it was now part of her, providing protection and life support that would let her survive in environments that would kill an unmodified human. More importantly, she carried the quantum communicator that would let her contact other Verdani sanctuaries. The archive had given her access codes for the entire network, making her the first being in thousands of years who could coordinate activities across multiple star systems. The cave exit opened onto a rocky plateau that offered a clear view of the Federation ships in the distance. Sarah could see them clearly through her enhanced vision, the 3 cruisers sitting like metal parasites on the red sand. Their crews were still investigating the decoy ruin, completely unaware of what they had missed. She activated the quantum communicator and immediately felt the presence of other Verdani systems across the galaxy. Most were still dormant, waiting for the right conditions to begin their programs. But some had been activated by other species, refugees and exiles who had stumbled across the sanctuaries and learned to use their gifts. On Kepler 438b, a group of human colonists had found a Verdani complex and were using it to transform their marginal world into a paradise. On Wolf 1061c, representatives of 3 different alien species were working together to activate atmospheric processors that would make the planet habitable for all of them. The Great Garden was growing again, slowly but inevitably. Sarah felt a surge of hope as she realized she wasn't alone in this work. The Verdani legacy was spreading through the galaxy, carried by beings who understood the value of life and growth over conquest and destruction. She could be part of something larger than any single world or species. But first, she had to deal with the immediate problem. The Federation wouldn't give up easily. When they found no trace of her body or her activities, they would start asking harder questions. They might even bring in specialists who could detect the concealment protocols. Sarah accessed the Verdani defensive systems through her neural interface, studying the options available to her. She could disable the Federation ships without harming their crews, leaving them stranded on the surface until rescue arrived. She could disrupt their communications and navigation systems, making it impossible for them to report their findings. Or she could do something more subtle. The Verdani had developed biological agents that could selectively edit memory engrams, removing specific experiences while leaving everything else intact. The Federation crews could forget they had ever detected energy readings from this system. They could remember arriving to find Sarah's remains and nothing else of interest. It was a tempting option, but Sarah hesitated. Memory editing was a line she wasn't sure she wanted to cross. The Verdani had used it only in extreme circumstances, and even then with great reluctance. Instead, she chose a different approach. The atmospheric processors could be programmed to create local weather phenomena, including sandstorms and electromagnetic disturbances. A major storm would force the Federation teams to take shelter in their ships, and the electromagnetic effects would scramble their instruments long enough for Sarah to complete her escape. She began programming the weather systems through the quantum communicator, coordinating atmospheric manipulations across a 1,000-kilometer radius. It would take several hours for the effects to build, but when they hit, they would be spectacular. While she waited for the storm to develop, Sarah established contact with the other active sanctuaries. The human colonists on Kepler 438b were eager to share information about their terraforming efforts. The multi-species team on Wolf 1061c had developed new techniques for accelerating plant growth in low-oxygen environments. Most importantly, she learned about the Gardeners Network, an informal alliance of beings who had found Verdani sanctuaries and chosen to continue their work. They shared resources, knowledge, and genetic material across star systems, slowly building the interconnected ecosystem the original Verdani had envisioned. Sarah realized she had found her true calling, not as a Federation military officer following orders without question, but as a gardener helping to spread life throughout the galaxy. The Federation had exiled her to break her spirit, but instead they had given her the freedom to become something greater than she had ever imagined. The storm was building now, dark clouds gathering on the horizon as the atmospheric processors worked their subtle magic. Soon the Federation teams would be forced to retreat to their ships, and Sarah would disappear into the network of sanctuaries that spanned the galaxy. She was no longer Commander Sarah Chen, exiled and condemned. She was Sarah the Gardener, and she had worlds to plant. The storm hit with the fury of a world awakening from a 1,000-year sleep. Sarah watched from her concealed position as hurricane-force winds swept across the ruins, carrying clouds of red sand that blocked visibility to mere meters. Lightning cracked through the artificial clouds, its electromagnetic pulse scrambling Federation sensors and communication arrays. Through the quantum communicators network, she could feel the atmospheric processors working in perfect harmony across the planet's surface. This wasn't just weather. It was a carefully orchestrated demonstration of power that would leave no doubt about what had caused it. The Federation teams had retreated to their ships within minutes of the storm's arrival, their sensors blind and their communications dead. Sarah could imagine Morrison's frustration as he watched his carefully planned investigation dissolve into chaos. The man who had condemned her to exile was now trapped inside a metal box, while she commanded the very forces of nature. But Sarah felt no satisfaction from their plight. The Verdani knowledge in her mind had brought with it their perspective on conflict. They had been a species that valued growth over dominance, preferring to build rather than destroy. Even now, as she demonstrated capabilities that could cripple the Federation fleet, she made sure the storm's effects were precisely controlled to avoid any real harm to the cruise. The quantum communicator chimed with an incoming message from Kepler 438b. The human colonists there had detected the energy signature of her weather manipulation and were offering assistance. Their Verdani sanctuary had defensive capabilities that could disable ships across multiple star systems if needed. Sarah declined their offer, but thanked them for their concern. This was her responsibility, her chance to prove that the Gardeners network could handle threats without resorting to the violence that characterized so much of galactic politics. As the storm raged above, Sarah made her way to one of the deep cavern systems that honeycombed the planet's crust. The Verdani had carved these tunnels for transportation and resource gathering, creating a hidden highway that connected all their major installations. She could travel hundreds of kilometers underground without ever exposing herself to surface observation. Her destination was the Planetary Coordination Center, a facility that controlled all the atmospheric processors and biological systems across the world. It was located in a massive cavern complex 300 kilometers from the surface ruins, deep enough to be invisible to any scanning technology the Federation possessed. The journey through the tunnel system took 12 hours, but Sarah traveled in comfort. Verdani transportation pods moved through the tunnels like living things, their bioluminescent surfaces providing gentle light while their internal systems maintained perfect atmospheric conditions. The pods could sense her needs and adjusted their speed and direction accordingly, requiring no input from her conscious mind. During the journey, Sarah used the quantum communicator to coordinate with Gardeners' network sites across the galaxy. The storm she had created was being analyzed by atmospheric specialists on 17 different worlds, each one learning techniques they could apply to their own terraforming projects. On Proxima Centauri C, a team of former Federation scientists who had defected after witnessing war crimes were using Verdani biotechnology to heal radiation damage from ancient nuclear conflicts. On Tau Ceti E, a mixed group of humans and Centaurians had established the first truly integrated colony, where both species worked together as equals in transforming their shared world. The network was growing faster than Sarah had imagined possible. Word was spreading through underground channels about worlds where exiles and refugees could find not just sanctuary, but purpose. The Federation's habit of casting out anyone who questioned their methods was inadvertently providing the Gardeners network with some of the galaxy's most capable and motivated individuals. When Sarah reached the Planetary Coordination Center, she found herself in a chamber that defied comprehension. The space was vast beyond measurement, its walls covered in living displays that showed the status of every biological system on the planet. Streams of data flowed through organic conduits that pulsed with bioluminescent patterns, creating a visual symphony of information. At the center of it all stood the Master Archive, a crystalline structure the size of a building that contained the complete planetary consciousness of the world. This was more than just a computer. It was the living mind of Kepler 442c itself, aware and intelligent in ways that no Federation AI could match. Sarah approached the Master Archive with reverence, feeling the weight of eons of patient work. This consciousness had been maintaining the planet's systems for thousands of years, slowly preparing for the day when someone would arrive to complete the Verdani mission. When she placed her hands on the crystal surface, the knowledge transfer was unlike anything she had experienced before. Instead of receiving information, she was sharing her own understanding with the planetary mind. Her experiences with human technology, her knowledge of Federation capabilities, her understanding of galactic politics all flowed into the archive's vast memory banks. In return, she received access to the planet's complete transformation plan. The atmospheric processors had been running at minimal capacity for millennia, but they could be accelerated dramatically. Within months rather than centuries, Kepler 442c could become a garden world capable of supporting millions of beings. But more importantly, she learned about the seed ships. The Verdani had built automated vessels that could carry their biotechnology to new star systems, establishing sanctuaries on worlds that had never known their touch. These ships had been dormant for thousands of years, waiting for someone with the proper authorization codes to activate them. Sarah now had those codes. She could feel the seed ships scattered throughout this stellar region, 27 vessels hidden in asteroid fields and dead moons. Each one carried enough Verdani technology to transform an entire star system, along with the quantum communicators needed to join the growing network. The implications were staggering. The Gardeners' network could expand from dozens of worlds to hundreds within a matter of years. They could offer sanctuary to every exile, refugee, and free thinker in the galaxy. They could create an alternative to the Federation's authoritarian empire, a civilization based on cooperation and growth rather than domination and control. But Sarah also understood the danger. The Federation would not ignore a threat of this magnitude. When they realized what was happening, they would respond with everything they had. The coming conflict would determine whether the galaxy's future belonged to gardeners or conquerors. The Master Archive showed her strategic projections, probability calculations that took into account every known variable. The Federation's military advantage was overwhelming in the short term, but the Gardeners' network had something more valuable: the loyalty of billions of beings who had been oppressed, exiled, or forgotten by the current galactic order. Sarah made her decision with the weight of worlds behind her. She activated the seed ships. Across the stellar region, automated vessels that had slept for millennia began powering up their ancient systems. Their quantum drives engaged, bending space-time around them as they began their journeys to target systems. Each ship carried the genetic templates needed to establish new sanctuaries, along with the biotechnology to begin immediate terraforming operations. The first ship was heading for Ross 128, where Federation surveys had identified a marginally habitable world with no strategic value. Within 6 months, that world would become a garden paradise capable of supporting the population of an entire Federation colony ship. The second ship targeted Wolf 359, location of a failed Federation mining operation that had left the system contaminated and abandoned. Verdani biotechnology could heal those wounds and transform the poisoned worlds into thriving ecosystems. One by one, the seed ships departed for their destinations, carrying the promise of new life to dead worlds throughout the galaxy. Sarah felt each launch like a heartbeat, the pulse of a growing organism that would soon span countless star systems. Above ground, the storm was beginning to weaken as the atmospheric processors returned to their normal operating parameters. The Federation teams would emerge from their ships to find a world that looked unchanged, their instruments showing no trace of the extraordinary events that had just unfolded beneath their feet. Captain Morrison would file a report describing the discovery of Sarah's remains in the complete absence of any alien technology. The Federation would mark Kepler 442c as thoroughly investigated and turn their attention to more promising targets. They would never realize that they had just witnessed the birth of something that would change the galaxy forever. Sarah smiled as she felt the quantum communicator pulse with messages from across the network. The Gardeners were ready to begin their work in earnest. The Federation had tried to exile one woman to break her spirit, but instead they had awakened a sleeping giant. The Great Garden was growing again, and this time nothing would stop it from blooming across the stars. 6 months after the seed ships launched, the galaxy was beginning to take notice of what the Federation's intelligence reports were calling the Garden Phenomenon. Worlds that had been barren wastelands for millennia were suddenly blooming with impossible life. Dead systems that hadn't appeared on strategic planning charts for decades were now showing energy signatures that rivaled major colony worlds. Sarah stood on the observation deck of the orbital station that now circled Kepler 442c, watching as the planet below continued its magnificent transformation. The red wasteland she had been exiled to was gone, replaced by a world of green continents and blue oceans that sparkled like jewels against the black of space. The transformation had been faster than even the Verdani projections had suggested. Once the Master Archive gained access to the planet's complete geological and atmospheric data, It had been able to optimize the terraforming process with surgical precision. Continents that had been dead rock for millions of years now supported vast forests and grasslands that could be seen from orbit. But Kepler 442c was just the beginning. Through the quantum communicator network, Sarah could sense the progress of sanctuaries throughout the galactic spiral arm. The seed ships had reached their targets and begun their work, each one establishing a new node in the growing network of garden worlds. Ross 128b had been the first success story. The marginally habitable world had possessed just enough water and atmosphere to give the Verdani biotechnology a foothold. Within 3 months, the planet had gone from barely supporting bacterial life to hosting complex ecosystems that could sustain millions of beings. The first refugee ships had already arrived, carrying political exiles and freedom fighters who had fled Federation persecution. Wolf 359's contaminated worlds had proved more challenging, but also more rewarding. The Verdani biotechnology didn't just clean up pollution, it converted toxic compounds into raw materials for accelerated plant growth. The former mining worlds were becoming showcases of ecological recovery that attracted scientists and environmentalists from across the galaxy. Each success brought new challenges. The Federation had initially dismissed the reports as sensor malfunctions or natural phenomena, but the evidence was becoming impossible to ignore. Admiral Chen's intelligence networks reported increasing Federation surveillance of systems where the garden phenomenon had been detected. Sarah found it grimly amusing that she now shared a surname with the Federation's chief intelligence officer. Admiral Patricia Chen was no relation, but the coincidence had led to some interesting complications when Federation intercepted communications mentioned Chen's activities in reference to the Gardner's network. The quantum communicator chimed with an incoming priority message from the sanctuary on Tau Cetia. Sarah accepted the connection and felt the presence of Dr. Marcus Webb, the former Federation xenobiologist who coordinated the multi-species colony there. "Sarah, we have a problem." Webb's thoughts carried urgency and worry. "Federation reconnaissance ships have been detected at the edge of our system. 3 heavy cruisers with full sensor arrays. They're not just passing through. They're conducting a systematic survey." Sarah felt a chill of apprehension. The Federation had finally connected enough dots to begin serious investigation of the garden worlds. She had known this day would come, but she had hoped for more time to establish the network before facing direct confrontation. "How long before they reach Tau Ceti?" she asked through the quantum link. 18 hours, maybe less if they detect our energy signatures," Webb replied. "We can conceal the surface installations, but there's no hiding the atmospheric changes. This world's oxygen levels have increased by 12% in the past 4 months. Any competent survey team will notice that." Sarah accessed the Master Archive's strategic analysis protocols, running probability calculations on Federation response patterns. The results were concerning, but not unexpected. Once the Federation confirmed the existence of the garden worlds, they would move quickly to either claim or destroy them. The technology that could transform dead worlds into paradise could also be weaponized in ways that would shift the galactic balance of power. "Activate the emergency protocols," Sarah instructed. "Begin evacuation of non-essential personnel to the backup sanctuaries. If the Federation wants to play hardball, we'll show them what we've learned from the Verdani about defensive strategies." The next few hours were a flurry of activity as the Gardener's network shifted into crisis mode. Across 17 star systems, sanctuary worlds began implementing concealment measures and defensive preparations. Non-combatant personnel were evacuated to hidden facilities, while those with specialized knowledge began uploading their experiences to the Quantum Archive network. Sarah, herself prepared for the possibility that Kepler 442c might be discovered and occupied. The orbital station could be evacuated quickly, its advanced biotechnology transferred to other network nodes before Federation forces arrived. But abandoning the first garden world would be a symbolic victory for those who preferred domination to cooperation. Instead, she chose a different strategy. If the Federation wanted to investigate the garden phenomenon, she would give them something to investigate. But the truth they discovered would be carefully shaped to serve the network's purposes. Sarah activated a secure quantum channel to every sanctuary world simultaneously, addressing the entire Gardener's network for the first time since its establishment. "Friends and fellow gardeners," she began, her thoughts carrying across impossible distances to reach beings of dozens of different species. The time of secrecy is ending. The Federation has discovered our work, and they will soon demand answers. I propose we give them exactly what they're looking for. She outlined her plan as the network listened. Instead of hiding from Federation investigation, they would reveal themselves selectively. The Garden Worlds would become showcases of what cooperative terraforming could accomplish, demonstrations of technology and philosophy that offered an alternative to the Federation's authoritarian approach. But the demonstrations would also be tests. Any Federation representatives who visited the Garden Worlds would be evaluated for their potential as allies or threats. Those who showed genuine interest in cooperation would be offered limited access to Verdani biotechnology. Those who showed only interest in exploitation would be politely but firmly turned away. The response from the network was overwhelmingly positive. Beings who had spent years hiding their activities were eager for the chance to show the galaxy what they had accomplished. The Garden Worlds had become something worth defending, and their inhabitants were ready to stand up for their achievements. On Tau Ceti A, Dr. Webb began preparing a presentation that would blow the minds of the approaching Federation survey team. Instead of hiding the atmospheric changes, he would showcase them as proof of what interspecies cooperation could accomplish. The multi-species colony had achieved technological and social integration that the Federation's best theorists claimed was impossible. On Ross 128b, the refugee communities were preparing to tell their stories to any Federation representatives who would listen. They had found freedom and purpose in the Garden Worlds that the Federation's own systems had denied them. Their testimonies would carry more weight than any technical demonstration. Sarah felt a surge of pride as she sensed the network's determination through the quantum links. These were beings who had been cast out, forgotten, or actively persecuted by the Galactic establishment. But they had built something beautiful together, something that proved cooperation was stronger than domination. The Federation had exiled her to break her spirit and serve as an example to others who might question their authority. Instead, they had created the catalyst for a revolution that would transform how civilizations approached growth, technology, and interspecies relations. In 18 hours, when the Federation survey ships reached Tau Ceti E, they would discover that the age of Garden Worlds was just beginning, and at its heart was a woman who had refused to be broken, who had turned exile into opportunity and isolation, into the foundation of a galactic network. The Federation had wanted to make an example of Commander Sarah Chen. They had succeeded, beyond their wildest nightmares, smiled as she felt the quantum network pulse with the thoughts and dreams of millions of beings across dozens of worlds. The Federation was about to learn that some exiles refuse to stay banished, and some gardens grow beyond any attempt to contain them. The Federation fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Tau Ceti system like a swarm of metal predators, their weapons powered and shields raised. Admiral Patricia Chen stood on the bridge of the flagship Retribution, studying the sensor readings that defied everything she thought she knew about planetary science. "Confirm those atmospheric readings," she ordered her science officer, though she already knew the answer. The planet below showed impossible levels of biological activity for a world that had been barren rock just months ago. "Confirmed, Admiral. Oxygen levels at 21% and rising. Massive electromagnetic signatures consistent with active biosphere. Multiple cities showing technological activity equivalent to a Class A Federation colony world." Admiral Chen felt a familiar mixture of professional curiosity and personal frustration. Someone had achieved in months what Federation terraforming technology required decades to accomplish. Either they had discovered revolutionary scientific principles, or they had gained access to alien technology that the Federation needed to control. "Open a channel to the planet's surface," she commanded. "This is Admiral Patricia Chen of the Terran Federation. By authority of the Galactic Security Council, you will identify yourselves and explain the nature of your activities in this system." The response came immediately, carried on quantum frequencies that shouldn't have been possible with any known technology. The voice was human, speaking with the calm confidence of someone who held all the advantages in the conversation. "This is Dr. Marcus Webb, coordinator of the Tau Ceti Garden Collective. Admiral Chen, your arrival is not unexpected. We extend an invitation for you and your senior staff to visit our world and see what we have accomplished here. Admiral Chen studied the tactical displays surrounding her command chair. The planet below showed no military installations, no orbital defenses, no weapon signatures of any kind. Either this was the most sophisticated trap in galactic history, or these people genuinely believed they could negotiate from a position of strength without any apparent military power. Dr. Webb, you will submit to Federation authority and prepare for immediate inspection. Any attempt to resist will be met with overwhelming force. Webb's response carried a note of gentle amusement that made Admiral Chen's teeth clench. Admiral, I understand your concern about unknown technology appearing in a system under Federation jurisdiction, but I think you'll find our methods are entirely peaceful and beneficial. We're not your enemies. We're your future. 3 hours later, Admiral Chen found herself walking through impossibly beautiful gardens that stretched to the horizon under an alien sun. The air was clean and sweet, filled with the songs of birds that shouldn't have existed on a world that had been lifeless 6 months ago. Beings of multiple species worked together in harmony, humans and Centaurians and others she didn't recognize, all focused on tending the growing ecosystem around them. Dr. Webb led the Federation delegation along paths that seemed to have grown rather than been built, explaining the principles behind what he called cooperative terraforming. The technology was biological rather than mechanical, working with natural processes rather than overwhelming them through brute force. The key insight, Webb explained as they paused beside a crystalline structure that hummed with barely audible music, is that transformation works best when all participants benefit. The plants provide atmospheric processing, the soil organisms break down minerals, the water systems distribute nutrients. Everything works together rather than competing for resources. Admiral Chen's security chief, Colonel Morrison, was clearly struggling with what he was seeing. This level of coordination requires central control systems that should be visible to our scanners. Where are your computers, your manufacturing facilities, your command centers? Webb gestured to the garden around them. You're standing in them, Colonel. The entire ecosystem is the computer. Every plant, every microorganism, every drop of water is part of a living network that processes information and coordinates activities. It's far more sophisticated than any mechanical system we could build. The demonstration continued for hours as the Federation delegation was shown agricultural facilities that produced food without depleting soil, manufacturing centers that grew products rather than assembling them, and communication systems that operated through quantum entanglement across galactic distances. But it was the people that impressed Admiral Chen most. These weren't the desperate refugees and political exiles she had expected to find. They were scientists, engineers, artists, and philosophers who had found purpose and fulfillment in building something entirely new. They spoke with passion about their work and genuine enthusiasm for sharing their discoveries with others. As the day progressed, Admiral Chen found herself questioning everything she thought she knew about effective governance and social organization. The Federation maintained order through hierarchy and force, keeping diverse species in line through threats and punishment. But here she saw cooperation achieved through mutual benefit and shared purpose. When the formal presentations were complete, Dr. Webb led the delegation to a hilltop overlooking the main settlement. The view was breathtaking, but what caught Admiral Chen's attention was the memorial garden at the summit. Thousands of flowers arranged in patterns that honored the memory of beings who had died in conflicts across the galaxy. We remember them all, Webb said quietly. Every refugee who didn't make it to safety, every scientist whose research was suppressed, every soldier who died following orders they knew were wrong. This garden exists because of their sacrifices. Admiral Chen found herself looking at one section of the memorial with particular intensity. The flowers there were arranged in Federation Navy patterns, honoring officers who had been executed or exiled for refusing illegal orders. She recognized some of the names. Commander Sarah Chen, she read aloud from one of the memorial stones. Exiled to Kepler 442c for refusing to fire on civilian targets. Status unknown. Webb nodded solemnly. Sarah was the first to make contact with the technology that made all this possible. Without her courage and wisdom, none of these garden worlds would exist. She proved that exile doesn't have to mean defeat, that isolation can become the foundation for something greater. Admiral Chen felt a strange mixture of emotions as she studied the memorial. The woman whose court-martial she had reviewed was being honored as a hero by beings across multiple star systems. The exile that was meant to serve as a warning had instead become an inspiration for millions. "Where is she now?" Admiral Chen asked. "Everywhere and nowhere," Webb replied. Sarah carries the complete knowledge of an ancient civilization in her mind. She can appear on any world in the network instantly through quantum translation, coordinating activities across impossible distances. She's become something between ambassador and guardian angel for everyone who seeks a better way. As if summoned by their conversation, the air shimmered near the memorial, and a figure materialized out of quantum foam. Admiral Chen found herself face to face with the woman whose fate had haunted her professional conscience for months. Sarah looked different than the military records indicated. Her hair was longer, streaked with patterns that seemed to shift in the light. Her eyes held depths that suggested vast knowledge and experience, but she wore no uniform, carried no weapons, and projected an aura of calm authority that had nothing to do with military rank. "Admiral Chen," Sarah said with a slight smile, "I've been looking forward to this conversation. You've seen what we've built here. The question is, what will you do with that knowledge?" Admiral Chen straightened to her full height, falling back on military protocol when faced with something that challenged everything she believed. "Commander Chen, you are under arrest for desertion, treason, and violation of your exile sentence. You will surrender yourself to Federation custody immediately." Sarah's smile widened. "I'm afraid that's not going to happen, Admiral. But I do have a proposal for you. The Federation is facing challenges that military force can't solve. Climate disasters, resource depletion, social unrest on hundreds of worlds. You need solutions, and we have them." The quantum communicator in Sarah's hand chimed with incoming messages from across the Galactic network. Admiral Chen watched in fascination as data streamed across the device's living surface. Reports from dozens of worlds where impossible transformations were taking place. "The Garden worlds are just the beginning," Sarah explained. "We're offering a new model for civilization, one based on cooperation rather than domination. Your people can be part of it, if they're willing to accept that there might be better ways than conquest and control." Admiral Chen looked around at the delegation that had accompanied her to the planet's surface. Her officers were staring at the quantum communicator with expressions of wonder and calculation. Colonel Morrison was taking detailed notes about everything he had observed. Even her most conservative advisors seemed shaken by the implications of what they had witnessed. "This technology could revolutionize Federation capabilities," her science officer whispered. "Terraform dead worlds in months instead of decades. Feed populations without depleting resources. Communicate instantly across any distance. Or it could destroy everything we've built," Morrison countered. "If every exile and refugee in the galaxy has access to this level of technology, what happens to established authority? What happens to order and security?" Sarah nodded thoughtfully at both perspectives. "Those are exactly the right questions to ask. And the answers depend on whether you choose to see this as a threat to control or an opportunity for growth." She gestured to the thriving settlement below them, where beings of multiple species work together in harmony. "We're not trying to destroy the Federation, Admiral. We're trying to evolve it, to show that there are ways of organizing society that benefit everyone rather than just those at the top." Admiral Chen felt the weight of decision settling on her shoulders. The Federation had sent her to investigate potential threats and neutralize them if necessary. But what she had found defied simple categorization as enemy or ally. The Garden worlds represented power that could reshape galactic civilization. The question was whether that power would be used to create something better, or would be suppressed to maintain the status quo. Looking into Sarah's eyes, Admiral Chen realized she was seeing her own future reflected back. She could follow orders and attempt to contain something that was already beyond containing. Or she could choose to become part of the transformation that was already reshaping the galaxy. The memorial garden around them seemed to whisper with the voices of all those who had died, choosing principle over convenience, conscience over conformity. Admiral Chen thought about the reports she would have to file, the decisions that would follow, the galaxy her actions would help create. "Commander Chen," she said finally, using Sarah's former rank with new respect, "I think it's time the Federation learned what its exiles have been teaching the rest of the galaxy." Sarah smiled and offered her hand. When Admiral Chen took it, she felt the touch of living quantum networks that spanned the stars, carrying the dreams and hopes of millions of beings who had chosen to build rather than destroy. The exile was over. The garden was growing, and the galaxy would never be the same. High above them, the Federation fleet waited for orders that would determine whether humanity's future lay in conquest or cultivation. In the memorial garden on Tau Ceti A, two women who shared a name and a military tradition made the choice that would echo across the stars for generations to come. The flag Sarah had raised on a dead world 6 months ago now flew over gardens that bloomed across the galaxy, and in its shadow, the fallen had become seeds for something that would grow beyond any empire's ability to contain.